bells rang for Julie, but it was Jasmine who wore the veil. Her sister wept in the sacristy, promised to a man everyone called a monster, sold to the most feared Alpha King on the continent. No one who enters his kingdom ever returns, and Jasmine already knew what happened to women who had no choice. Once, she had walked toward an altar too, but she was abandoned at the church in front of everyone. She learned early that a woman's humiliation lasts far longer than a man's lie. People said she had been touched before marriage. A lie, but it was enough to stain her name forever. And now, on top of everything else, she was considered too old. No dowry, no honor, and a family ruined by debt. So when Julie, her younger sister, begged not to be handed over to the Alpha King, Jasmine did the only thing she could. She took her place. She stepped into the empty church. She walked alone. Waiting beyond the veil was a man no one dared look in the eye, the Alpha King of Ravenhold. And when Jasmine finally lifted her gaze to the altar, her fear vanished for a single moment. Because that man's face belonged to more than rumors. It belonged to a memory she had never managed to bury. She walked to that altar determined to hate him until her very last day. She swore that man would be her grave. She swore she would never surrender to him. Then why did the air leave her lungs every time he came close? Why did his eyes always drift down to her lips? And why did the most feared Alpha King on the continent never speak a single word to her? The church bells began to ring, and Julie started to cry. It wasn't the beautiful, joyful crying of a bride. It was the other kind. The kind that comes from deep in your chest, shaking your shoulders, blurring your vision, making the veil tremble over your pale face. Julie stood pressed against the cold stone wall of the sacristy, both hands clutching the skirt of her white dress, slowly shaking her head, as if refusing to wake from a nightmare. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Jasmine, I can't." Outside, their father was calling for them. His voice was hoarse and weary, dragged down by the leg that had never healed properly. Their mother answered in anxious whispers, and the bells kept ringing, too loud for such an empty church, because the church was empty. Jasmine had noticed it the moment they arrived. No guests, no rows of crowded pews, no gossiping women whispering to one another, no children running between the columns. Just their parents, herself, and her sister. And up ahead, at the foot of the altar where the candlelight barely reached, stood two men. One of them was broad-shouldered, motionless as a dark statue. The other stood beside him, shorter, watchful. The groom was already waiting, and no one had seen his face yet. "Breathe," Jasmine said, cupping her sister's face in her hands. "Look at me. Breathe." Julie took a breath, or tried to. The air left her in broken sobs. "They're going to kill me in there. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. Nobody who goes to that kingdom ever comes back." Her icy fingers wrapped around Jasmine's wrist. "I'm going to die, Jasmine. I'm 22 years old, and they sold me to a monster because we have nothing left." There it was, spoken out loud without decoration, the truth no one in their house had ever dared to say. They had nothing left. Once upon a time, they had. Jasmine remembered her father's shop smelling of fresh fabric, bolts of silk stacked to the ceiling, customers climbing the steps of Marwick wearing dresses her father had sold them. She remembered when their family name still meant something. Then came the ruin. Her father had invested the family's savings in a shipment of silk that was supposed to arrive by sea. The ship never came. The business partner who had convinced him to make the deal disappeared that very same week, leaving every debt in her father's name. Without the money from that sale, he couldn't pay his creditors. He sold the shop. He sold the furniture. He sold every last thing their home still held. Even that wasn't enough. One winter night, the men he owed grew tired of waiting. They came to the door and collected with their own hands what he couldn't repay with money. That was why he walked with a limp. And that was when Jasmine learned that poverty doesn't arrive all at once. It comes slowly, taking one piece at a time, until nothing remains but fear. And that morning, fear had a name, a king. The bells stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, deep, filled with expectation. Somewhere outside, their father's footsteps faded away, and their mother's voice went with him. For a moment, just a moment, the two sisters were alone in the sacristy. And in that moment, Jasmine made her decision. Take off the veil. Julie looked up, confused. What? Take off the veil. Give me the dress. Jasmine's hands were already at the ties on the back of her sister's gown, undoing them. I'll take your place. You've lost your mind. Listen to me. Jasmine gripped her shoulders firmly. No one up there has seen your face. We haven't even seen his face. I'll put on the veil, walk down the aisle, and marry him. You leave through the back right now with Mom and Dad and disappear. Julie started crying again. But this was a different kind of crying. The cry of someone hearing their own salvation and feeling ashamed to accept it. They'll find out. When he realizes, then that becomes my problem. Jasmine pulled the white dress over her own body. The fabric was heavy. Heavy as a sentence. Promise me one thing. If this goes wrong, if he finds out and wants revenge, don't look back. Take Mom and Dad and run, and don't stop. Jasmine, promise me. I promise, Julie whispered. Jasmine lowered the veil over her face. The world turned ivory-colored, blurred and distant. Beyond that thin layer of fabric, her life was either about to begin again or come to an end. And she wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. Why me? She thought. Why am I always the one left holding the bag? Even so, she took the first step. The church aisle was long, and she crossed every inch of it alone. Without her father by her side. Without music. Without anyone watching her. Because there was no one there. Only the sound of her own shoes against the stone floor and the pounding of her heart beneath the lace. 34 years old, she thought. I'm 34 years old, and this is how I'm getting married, hidden behind a veil that isn't even mine. The first time had been different. The first time, she had been 31, wearing a dress she had chosen with care, with a man waiting for her at the altar. Or at least, that's what everyone had believed. The man never showed up. They waited an hour, then another. And by the time everyone realized he wasn't coming, he had already started spreading rumors throughout the city. He claimed he hadn't come because he knew her too well already, that he'd had her before the wedding, that he would never marry something other men had already had. Every word of it was a lie. But a man's lie carries more weight than a single woman's truth. And by the age of 31, an unmarried woman already bears the blame simply for existing. After that, no family wanted their name associated with hers. Too old, too tarnished, no dowry, no honor, no future, and a bankrupt family. 3 years of staring that truth in the face every morning. And now she was walking toward an altar once again. Only this time, there could be no mistake about who the groom was. The most feared man on the continent. The king no one ever returns from. At least she thought, and the bitterness of it almost made her laugh. At least I'm not the one he wanted. At least I'm saving Julie. At least my life was already ruined anyway. With that thought lodged in her chest, she reached the altar, lifted her chin beneath the veil, and finally looked at the man she was about to marry. And the world stopped. Because she knew that face. Not from the rumors, not from the stories whispered in taverns. She knew that face up close, truly knew it, in a way that tightened her throat and stole the air from her lungs before she could prepare herself. No, it couldn't be him. Her heart stumbled, then raced. Beneath the veil, heat rushed to her face, hot, fast, uncontrollable. She was grateful for the lace hiding what had to be written all over her expression. Shock, recognition, and something worse, something old she had buried deep and sworn never to dig up again. He was older now, harder. His jaw was covered by a short beard, his hair tied back, his broad shoulders filling out the dark coat he wore. But they were the same eyes, light-colored, deep, attentive, locked on her as though they could see right through the fabric. Him. All this time, it had been him. And the first thing she felt, before fear, before reason, was anger. A fury so intense she had to clench her fists inside her sleeves to stop herself from shaking. Because if that was the Alpha King, then that was the man who had asked for her sister's hand. Not hers. Her sister's. Out of all the women in the world, all the families in the kingdom, he had chosen Julie, the younger one. The prettier one. The one who still had value in the marriage market. The sister without a scandal attached to her name. And the question she had sworn never to ask again returned, whole and sharp, hurting just as much as it had the first day. Why is it never me? He had seen her. He had known her. And still, when the time came to choose, he chose someone else. How was she supposed to swallow that? How was she supposed to stand there beneath a veil, promising her life to a man who had looked at everything she was and decided he didn't want her? His eyes never left her. Calm, steady, unhurried. And there was no anger in his gaze, only confusion. That infuriated her even more. The priest spoke the words. Jasmine barely heard them. She answered when she was supposed to, her voice muffled beneath the veil, quiet enough not to reveal that she wasn't Julie. His hands were warm when they took hers, large, careful in a way she neither expected nor wanted to notice. When the moment came to lift the veil and seal everything with a kiss, she took a step back, and she didn't raise the veil. Silence fell. The priest hesitated, glancing from groom to bride, uncertain of what to do. The other man standing beside the king opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. Jasmine waited for the fury, waited for him to rip the lace from her face. Waited for the roar, the punishment, the humiliation in front of her own parents. None of it came. The king looked at her for one more moment through the veil, as though weighing something only he could see. Then, slowly, he turned his back. That was all. He turned and walked toward the doors. The man beside him followed, and all Jasmine could do was follow after them. He wasn't angry, and somehow that bothered her more than any shouting ever could have. The carriage departed before noon. Inside, no one spoke. Jasmine sat in the corner, as far away as the seat would allow, her veil finally pushed back now that there was no one left to deceive. The king sat across from her, his large frame taking up the opposite bench, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the carriage window. He hadn't said a single word since the church. No questions, no demands. He barely even looked at her. Good, she thought. Great. Let it stay that way. And yet her eyes kept drifting back to his profile. To the tense line of his jaw, the large hand resting on his knee. To the impossible calm of a man who had just gotten married and seemed not to care who his bride was. Any minute now, he'll realize it, she thought. And the idea turned her stomach cold. Any minute now he'll understand that he didn't marry the woman he asked for. And when he does, what will he do? Will he undo it? Send for Julie? Send for all of them? They had convinced themselves they had fooled one of the most dangerous men on the continent. No one fooled a man like that without paying the price. Run, Julie, she prayed silently, watching the road disappear behind the window. Run and don't stop. The carriage climbed a hill, rounded a long bend, and then the trees parted, and Ravenhold appeared. Towering walls of dark stone rose against the gray winter sky. Pointed towers, iron gates, guards standing motionless along the ramparts like shadows. In all her life, Jasmine had never heard a single story about this kingdom that ended well. It was the place people went to and never sent word back from. A place where rumors died because no one was left alive to tell them. The gates opened, the carriage rolled beneath them, and the groan of the hinges was deep, long, final. Jasmine watched the iron gates close behind her and felt, deep in her chest, the full weight of what she had done. She had crossed the threshold, and no one ever came back. They escorted Jasmine to the king's chambers after night had fallen over Ravenhold, and she was still wearing her wedding dress. Every step down the stone corridor made her heart pound harder. Not from modesty, from terror. At any moment, that man would realize Julie wasn't the one walking into his room. He would see the wrong bride. And then she would learn firsthand what happened to those who dared deceive the king no one ever returned from. But it wasn't only fear. It was anger, too. And anger was worse, because she didn't know what to do with it. Anger that he had dragged her family to that altar. Anger that he had chosen her sister. And anger over something older. Something buried for years that had clawed its way back to the surface the moment she looked up beneath the veil and recognized him. Don't think about it. Not now. The door opened. The room was large, warmed by the fire blazing in an enormous hearth. And he was there. Standing near the flames, already changed out of his formal clothes, wearing nothing but a dark robe hanging loosely across his chest. The firelight traced the outline of his broad shoulders, the strong line of his neck, the stillness of his hands at his sides. Jasmine stopped in the doorway. She took a deep breath and decided she wasn't going to hide anymore. With one sharp tug, she ripped the veil from her face and waited. She waited for shock, for anger, for surprise. She waited for him to realize he'd been deceived. She waited for the shouting, the accusations, anything. Soren simply looked at her. No surprise. No questions. His pale eyes traveled slowly across her face, utterly unhurried, as if he already knew exactly who he would find beneath that lace. More than anything else, that was what knocked the ground out from under her. He already knows, she thought, her stomach twisting. How does he already know? You don't even look surprised, she said, her voice coming out louder than she'd intended. Of course not. Why would you be? Men like you think you know everything, don't you? He didn't answer. And instead of calming her, his silence unleashed everything she'd been holding back. I hate you, she said. The words came out shaking, then steady, then too fast to stop. You had no right to drag my family into this, to buy us as if we were sacks of grain, to take advantage of the fact that we had nothing left. Her chest tightened. You're a coward who hides behind these walls and these rumors and lets everyone else live in fear for you. Nothing. Not a single word. He remained exactly where he was, his eyes fixed on her. Then she noticed something that unsettled her. His gaze had dropped. It was fixed on her mouth, locked onto her lips, following every word she spoke with an intensity that sent unwanted heat rushing up her neck. Why is he looking at me like that? She wondered. Why does he watch me as if every word I say matters when he never answers any of them? That only made her angrier. She turned away from him and began pacing in front of the fireplace, her words tumbling out too quickly, one over the other, without looking at his face again. "You chose her," she said, her back to him. "Out of every woman in the kingdom, you chose my sister. You saw me, you knew me, and you still picked someone else." Her voice faltered, and she hated herself for it, but she kept pacing. "I was a fool for believing in you, for carrying you inside me all these years as if you were—" She swallowed the rest before she could finish. She wouldn't give him that. "Damn it. Why didn't you tell me you were the Alpha King?" Soren took a step toward her. He wanted to understand her, to reach her somehow. But she didn't stand still for even a second. She paced from one end of the room to the other, spoke too fast, turned her face away, kept her back to him, pouring everything out without leaving him a single opening. And all he could do was watch her, standing there with his empty hands at his sides. His jaw tightened, his brows drew together, and for a single moment, just one, something deep crossed his face. Something that looked like pain. Real pain. The kind she had never expected to see in a man everyone claimed had no heart. Even so, he said nothing. And his silence only fueled her terrible urge to hurt him, to force some kind of reaction out of him. Any reaction at all. "You can lock me up here. You can do whatever you want." She lifted her chin. "But I will never forgive you. I will never share your bed. I will never be your real wife. I'd rather face any punishment than give myself to a man like you." That was when he closed his eyes. That was all. He closed them for a moment and slowly lifted a hand to his forehead, his fingers pressing against his temple like a man carrying a weariness too heavy for his body. And somehow, for reasons she couldn't explain, that simple gesture finally silenced her. The room fell quiet, and for the first time since she'd started shouting, Jasmine heard the sound of her own breathing, loud, uneven, and realized just how much she had said, how little he had answered. That she was standing in a stranger's room, still dressed in her wedding gown, pouring years of hurt onto a stone wall that didn't even try to defend itself. She had no idea what to do with that realization. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She turned her back, crossed the room, and walked out. A few minutes later, she was locked inside the chambers prepared for her, her back pressed against the door, her heartbeat pounding in her throat. And the only thing she could think about, no matter how hard she tried not to, was the way he'd looked at her mouth. The heat she'd felt rising inside her that had nothing to do with anger. Idiot, she told herself, closing her eyes. Idiot. It shouldn't have been so easy to desire a man she'd sworn to hate. The days that followed confused Jasmine more than she wanted to admit. Ravenhold was nothing like the stories. She had expected chains, screams, people bent beneath the weight of fear. Instead, she found a kingdom that breathed slowly. Servants laughed quietly in the hallways. Children ran through the courtyard. Women sang while hanging laundry to dry, and the guards, even enormous, even silent, stepped aside for her with respectful nods. Everyone treated her with kindness, and instead of reassuring her, that kindness kept her guard up. It's a lie, she thought as she crossed the frost-covered gardens. It's all an act. No one lives happily in a monster's home. They're pretending, or they're too afraid to let the truth show. What bothered her most were the women. The king only had to walk into a room, silent as ever, and they turned toward him. They smiled. They adjusted their hair. They looked for excuses to pass close by. He didn't even need to open his mouth, and somehow he still managed what no other man could accomplish after talking all night. And she hated how much it bothered her. At first, she tried. She really did. She greeted the king whenever she saw him in the corridors. She asked him questions over dinner. She tried to understand who he was, what he expected from their marriage, what he intended to do with her. And every single time, she got the same thing in return. The look. That steady, attentive gaze that dropped to her lips and stayed there while he responded, if at all, with a slight nod before returning to his routine. Never a single word. And the worst part was that she never saw him speak to anyone else either. Not the servants, not the advisors, not the ordinary guards. The only people he seemed to communicate with were the wolf guards who surrounded him. And even that was strange. A single glance, a brief exchange of expressions, and everything seemed settled between them without a single order spoken aloud. With nothing else to cling to, Jasmine's mind began inventing answers. Maybe he's mute, she thought. Or maybe he's deaf. Or maybe, and this possibility irritated her most of all, maybe he was pretending, playing games with her, making her uncomfortable on purpose, waiting for her to squirm in the silence. And because all she knew about him were terrifying stories, her mind always chose the worst explanation. Every silence became a threat. Every look felt like a warning that something terrible could happen at any moment. What infuriated her most was the smile. Every now and then, she would catch him watching her with the slightest tug at the corner of his mouth. A near smile she interpreted as pure mockery. He thinks I'm ridiculous, she thought, her cheeks burning. He's enjoying this. That night, alone in her room, she took the small, worn diary from her luggage. Between its pages rested a dried flower, carefully pressed flat. A flower she had never found the courage to throw away. Her fingers brushed over the withered petals, and something tightened painfully in her chest. How many nights did I spend writing about you, she thought, without even knowing your name? What a fool I was. She snapped the diary shut and tucked it back into the bottom of her trunk, where she wouldn't have to look at it. By the third evening in the castle, Jasmine could no longer bear the cold. Between bites of dinner, she mentioned that the stone walls chilled her to the bone, that even the thickest blankets weren't enough to keep out the night. No one responded. The king kept eating, his gaze fixed on her, always on her lips, and she returned to her room convinced she'd been talking to the walls. The next morning, she woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. When she opened the door, she found a line of servants carrying armful after armful of firewood, restocking every fireplace in the wing where she slept. She stood there, staring in confusion. A few days later, she mentioned that she missed reading, that back home, before everything fell apart, there had always been books. The next day, a servant informed her with a respectful bow that the castle's old library had been reopened, and that the Queen had unrestricted access whenever she wished. The Queen. She still stumbled over the word. And when, in an unguarded moment, she admitted that she missed the flowers that grew on her parents' land, the small white ones that bloomed at the end of winter. It took only a week for those same flowers to appear in the flower bed beneath her window. Any other woman would have melted. Jasmine clenched her fists. He's playing with me, she thought, staring out at the flowers while her chest tightened in a way that only made her angrier. He's toying with his prey before the kill. That's what men like him do. They fatten the animal before they bleed it dry. And to remind herself who she was dealing with, she repeated every night the litany she'd heard her entire life. They say he takes children from neighboring kingdoms. They say he kidnaps women. They say he buys people like livestock. They say there's a secret dungeon beneath the castle. They say he hoards gold while neighboring lands go hungry. They say he's made dark bargains. They say he destroyed entire villages on nights of the full moon. And they say he tears out the throats of anyone who dares threaten him with his own teeth. A chill ran through Jasmine at the thought. And if he could do all that, she wondered, what would he do to my sister if she were here in my place? There was no trusting anyone in that castle. Because if even half of those stories were true, then everyone there was complicit. That night, exhausted by her own theories and with no one she could trust, Jasmine decided to do what she had been avoiding. She would walk through the castle in the dark and see for herself what those walls were hiding. She slipped downstairs barefoot, shielding the candle flame with her hand. At a bend in the corridor near a tall window, she stopped. Down below, in the courtyard lit only by moonlight, a figure was crossing toward the back gates. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark cloak. Him. The king was leaving his own castle alone in the middle of the night, like a man who didn't want to be seen. Jasmine stood frozen behind the curtain, her heart pounding as she watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the walls. "Where are you going?" she wondered. "What do you do out there, hidden from everyone?" And an unwelcome answer rose alongside the jealousy she refused to name. "They say he keeps company with many women." So that was it. That was why the women in the castle smiled so much whenever he walked by. That was why he left when everyone else was asleep. She walked back to her room angry at Soren, angry at the women, and even angrier at herself for caring. That night, she didn't sleep, and the next night, leaning against the same window, she saw it again, and the next, and the next. Every night, standing by that window, Jasmine watched him leave and let her imagination fill in the rest. A pleasure house. That had to be it. What other reason would pull a man from a warm bed before dawn every night, sneaking away where no one could see him? He was going to another woman's arms. He had to be. After 2 weeks, Jasmine knew the route by heart. The narrow staircase, the cold corridor, the heavy curtain beside the tall window overlooking the back courtyard. Every night she took up the same hidden position, and every night she watched her husband's dark silhouette cross the courtyard and disappear beyond the walls. But that night, the courtyard was empty. She waited, counted her own heartbeat. Nothing. No cloak. No footsteps. No shadow. Where was he? Had he left earlier? Had he stayed? Curiosity won out over common sense. She stepped out from behind the curtain, walked onto the open balcony, and leaned over the stone railing, craning her neck to see the dark corners below. "Where are you?" she thought. "You disappear every single night, and tonight of all nights." The stone was slick with dew. Her foot slipped. The world spun. The railing, the empty air, the ground far below waiting for her, and a scream rose in her throat without ever escaping. "I'm falling." Her hands scraped desperately against the wet stone, finding no grip. Then an arm wrapped around her waist and yanked her back. Hard. All at once. She crashed against something warm, solid, unyielding. And when she realized she was still standing, that the ground remained beneath her feet, that she wasn't going to die that night, she became aware of everything else. It was him. Soren's arms surrounded her, one around her waist, the other firm against her back, holding her against his chest. His warmth seeped through the thin fabric of her dress. Both her hands were gripping his shoulders, without her even remembering deciding to do it. Her face was only inches from his. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Don't let go yet." The thought slipped into her mind before she could stop it. Ridiculous, traitorous. She should have stepped back, thanked him, pulled away, returned to her room, kept the distance she had sworn to keep. Instead, she stayed there in the dark, trapped in the arms of the man she claimed to hate, his breathing so close it blended with hers. "Why won't you talk to me?" The question came out barely above a whisper, and it hurt more than she'd expected. "I've yelled at you. I've begged you. I've insulted you. And you never answer me. Why?" His gaze dropped. It settled on her lips and stayed there. Dark, intent, lingering. Then something changed. Deep inside those pale eyes, something ignited. A molten gold warmth. an amber glow that slowly spread until it consumed his entire iris, until his eyes burned golden in the shadows. Jasmine stopped breathing. His thumb brushed against her back. The hand on her waist drew her infinitesimally closer. His mouth lowered toward hers, slowly. The air between them vanished completely. And for one unbearable moment, she wanted it. Wanted it so badly it hurt. Which was exactly why she ran. She tore herself out of his arms, turned, and fled down the corridor without looking back, barefoot, her heart lodged in her throat, her skin burning everywhere his hands had touched her. Back in her room, with her back pressed against the closed door, she lifted her fingers to her lips. Golden, she thought, still breathless. His eyes turned golden. How? Must be some wolf thing. That afternoon, while the maids tidied her room and braided her hair, Jasmine let the thought slip out loud. This castle is beautiful, but it's sad. She looked down at the quiet courtyard below. So many people live here, and everything is so silent. Back in Marwick, before everything fell apart, my mother used to host balls. The house felt alive, filled with music. She sighed. I miss that. A ball would do this place some good. The older maid chuckled softly as she folded a shawl. Oh, my lady, the king would never allow that. Soren doesn't like parties, crowds, music, packed ballrooms. He's avoided those things for years. What a shame. Jasmine turned back to the window, and something small and stubborn spoke louder than reason. But you never know, right? Maybe. She didn't even believe her own words. The next morning, the castle felt transformed. There was a new energy in the hallways, servants hurrying by with armfuls of flowers, the smell of sweet bread drifting up from the kitchens, excited voices where silence used to live. Jasmine went downstairs without understanding what was happening, and she was stopped 3 times before she even reached the courtyard. Have you heard? There's going to be a ball tonight, a young maid said, her face glowing with excitement. It's been so long. A stable hand tipped his hat as she passed. They say it's thanks to you, my queen, that you asked for it. He smiled shyly. We're grateful. We needed something like this. Jasmine didn't know what to say. Farther ahead, an elderly woman took her hands in hers and, with tears in her eyes, told her about a ball she had attended when she was young, before the kingdom had shut its doors to such things. Without meaning to, Jasmine smiled. Warmth spread through her chest, light and unfamiliar, and for a moment she felt happy in a way she hadn't in years. Then she realized why, and the smile faded from her lips. It was him. I mentioned it in a private room with only the maids around. How did he know? And why? For the love of all things. Would he arrange an entire ball just because I said I missed them? She hated the happiness she'd felt, hated how deeply it touched her. Every kindness from that man was another thread pulling her closer, and she had sworn she wouldn't let herself be pulled in. It's a trap, she repeated to herself all day. It's all a trap. But her traitorous heart beat faster and faster until nightfall. By the time night fell, the ballroom was unrecognizable. Candles flickered in every corner. Music climbed the stone walls she had only ever known as cold, and the warmth of laughing, twirling bodies filled the air. Full, alive. People from all over the kingdom had come dressed in their finest, simply because the king had opened his doors. And in the middle of it all, there he was. Soren stood near the throne, dressed in black, tall and motionless amid the commotion. And around him, as always, there were women. They laughed, touched his arm, leaned closer, competing for a glance from the man who never even bothered to speak. Jasmine stopped at the entrance, her stomach twisting. How ridiculous that I care, she thought, clutching the fabric of her skirt. He isn't mine. I don't want him. Actually, he is mine. But I still don't want him. She grabbed a glass anyway and took a drink. That was when he saw her. Over the crowd, over all those women, Soren's eyes found hers and stopped. Right there. On her. And slowly, unhurriedly, the corner of his mouth lifted. A small smile, a teasing smile, a smile that said, "I know you're watching." Jasmine scowled and looked away. Conceited, she thought, heat rising up her neck. Arrogant. Let him stay with his women. She picked up another glass and drank every time one of them laughed a little too close to him, every time he lowered his head to listen to one of them. The wine went down warm, dulling the sharp edges of the jealousy she refused to name. Across the ballroom, Soren never took his eyes off her. He saw the third glass, the fourth. He saw her steps grow unsteady, the flush spreading up her neck, and something tightened in his expression. He made the slightest gesture toward the man who followed him like a shadow, a subtle tilt of his head in her direction, and the beta understood immediately. From that moment on, every glass placed in Jasmine's hand looked like wine, but it was only dark fruit juice, sweet and harmless. She drank without noticing the difference, convinced she was drowning out her miserable night. She never got any drunker than she already was. She had no idea that from across the ballroom, a man was making sure she didn't lose herself. The music changed. The opening notes of a slow waltz filled the room, and couples began gathering in the center of the floor. Jasmine retreated toward the wall, the now lukewarm glass between her fingers, content to stay out of it, to watch from a distance, A shadow fell over her. When she looked up, he was there. Soren. So close she had to tilt her head back to see his face. He said nothing. Of course he didn't. He simply held out his hand. Open. Waiting. An invitation. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The women who had surrounded him moments earlier stood frozen, watching. Jasmine lowered her eyes to his outstretched hand, to his long fingers, to his open palm waiting for hers. Don't do it, she begged herself. You know what happens when you get too close to him. She placed her hand in his. Soren's fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and he led her to the center of the ballroom. One of his hands settled at her waist and drew her close. Too close. His other hand held hers aloft. Then they began to move. He was a good dancer. That caught her off guard. Every step was sure, every turn effortless, his body guiding hers through the music without a single word. And the heat. His heat seeped through her dress. His hand burned against her waist. With every turn, his chest brushed against hers, making it harder and harder to breathe. Jasmine's heart raced. Don't feel this, she begged herself. For the love of everything sacred, don't feel this. But she did. She felt every place he touched her. She felt the weight of his gaze on her face, always drifting back to her lips. And when she looked up to escape that gaze, she found his mouth right there, close, slightly parted, and the thought came before she could stop it. God, what a mouth. She hated herself instantly. Stop looking at me like that, she murmured, breathless. The corner of his mouth lifted again, that half smile. And he spun her slowly, pulling her back even closer, his hand now spread across the small of her back. Jasmine realized she was lost, that every second of that dance was the sweetest and cruelest thing she had ever experienced. She loved it. She hated loving it. She wanted the music to stop. She prayed it would never end. When the final note faded away, they remained standing in the middle of the ballroom, their hands still joined, their breathing uneven, far too close. His eyes burned again, gold rising from deep within his irises. And for a moment, she was certain he was going to kiss her right there, in front of everyone. She pulled away, turned, and fled the ballroom before her legs could betray her. He caught up with her in a side corridor, away from the music, and without the caution that kept her together during the day, she fell apart. "Why would you do that?" Her voice was thick with emotion, her eyes burning. She walked up to him and struck his chest with the flat of her hand. "Why do you dance with me? Fill my room with flowers. Look at me like that all the time, and never say a single word to me?" The question stumbled out. "Do you have another woman? Is that it? Am I too ugly, too old? Do you only want the younger ones, the ones who laugh around you?" Something crossed his face, but it wasn't amusement this time. He shut his eyes tightly, his jaw locked, his breathing deep and heavy, his fists clenched at his sides. A man fighting against his own body, against something he'd been holding back for far too long. Even so, when he opened his eyes again, he didn't move toward her. She did. She rose onto her toes, closed her eyes, and reached for his mouth. Soren stopped her. His large hands came up to cradle her face gently, his thumbs resting against her cheeks, keeping her just inches away. Firm. Serious. Even with her standing there, wanting him, offering herself to him. He didn't take advantage, and something inside her broke. "Why did you abandon me?" she whispered. The question came from somewhere deep and old, from a wound she hadn't realized was still bleeding. A tear slid down her cheek, warm against his thumb. "Say something. Anything. Please." He tried to pull her gently into his arms. She shoved him away, hit his chest once, twice, weakly, crying, and he absorbed every blow without stepping back. Then he caught one of her hands in the air, slowly, and brought her fingers to his lips. He kissed them, softly, lingering. His eyes closed like a man at prayer. "I hate you," she said, her voice shattered. "I hate you. I hate that I want you." The wine and exhaustion overcame her right there. She sagged against his chest, her eyes growing heavy, her anger dissolving into sleep. She barely felt him lift her into his arms and carry her through the castle's silent corridors. He meant to take her back to her own chambers, but when he reached the door to his room, he stopped. He didn't trust the state she was in. He carried her inside, laid her down in his bed, and sat nearby, keeping watch. At some point in the early hours of the morning, sleep claimed him too. When Jasmine woke, the pale morning light was streaming through a window that wasn't hers. She sat up with a start, her heart racing, her head pounding. Dark sheets. A large room. His scent everywhere. Wood and something wild beneath it. Soren's bed. He wasn't there, but on the pillow beside her where his head must have rested there was a flower. Small. White. Delicate petals. One of the same flowers now growing beneath her bedroom window. Jasmine's hand stopped just before touching it. She knew that flower. She knew the meaning behind the gesture. And the recognition tore a deep hole through her chest because it brought back a memory she had locked away and sworn never to revisit. "No," she thought, stepping away from the bed. "Don't think about it." She clenched the flower in her hand and hated herself. Hated the way her skin still tingled where he had held her. Hated that she had cried in his arms. Hated that she had admitted the truth, that she wanted him, out loud, right in front of him. Because that was what infuriated her most. Not the anger, the desire. She had spent years loving a man without a name, only to discover too late that he was the king everyone feared. The king who had asked for her sister's hand, not hers. The king who didn't truly want her, who filled her days with flowers, firewood, and carefully measured kindness, only to disappear every night into someone else's arms. I won't be a fool twice, she decided, closing her hand around the flower until the petals crumpled. That night, she was going to find out where he went, no matter what it cost her. That night, Jasmine didn't wait by the window. The moment she saw Soren's dark silhouette crossing the courtyard toward the back gates, she went after him. Barefoot again, her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders, her heart lodged in her throat. She was done making up stories in her head. Tonight, she was going to see for herself what that man did every night before dawn. She followed at a distance, hiding behind trees and low stone walls, careful not to be seen or heard. Soren walked quickly and confidently, with the ease of someone following a path he had traveled 1,000 times before. He crossed a sparse stretch of woods, rounded a hill, and stopped in front of a large house set far away from everything else, its windows glowing warmly and smoke rising from the chimney into the night sky. Jasmine crouched behind a tree trunk and held her breath. The door opened before he could even knock. A woman stepped into the doorway, young, her face illuminated by the warm light spilling from inside. The moment she saw who it was, she smiled. A wide, happy smile. The smile of someone who had been waiting for him. And stepped aside to let him in. Soren entered. The door closed. And the ground seemed to disappear beneath Jasmine's feet. So big, she thought, her eyes burning. The house he built for the other woman. Look at the size of it. The warmth. The woman waiting at the door. So that was it. That was where he went every night. To the woman he truly loved. The one he had chosen with his heart. Far from the eyes of the court. And she, Jasmine, was nothing but a facade. The wife in name only, locked away in the cold castle while the real one lived in that warm house, greeting him with a smile every night. She didn't stay to see anything else. She couldn't bear it. She turned and disappeared into the forest without direction, her feet sinking into the wet leaves, tears finally falling now that no one could see her. It wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough to be abandoned at the altar once, humiliated in front of the entire kingdom, thrown aside like spoiled merchandise. And now this, trapped in a marriage to a man who belonged to someone else, trapped in a marriage that existed only in name, with a husband who spent his nights in the warmth of another woman's home. And the worst part, the very worst part, was that she wanted him. She hated herself for it. For loving a man the entire world swore was a monster. And because no matter how hard she looked, she couldn't find anything in him that justified the stories. Where was the monster? All she saw was the man who filled her room with firewood when she was cold, who reopened libraries, who planted flowers beneath her window, who held her face so gently when he could have taken whatever he wanted. What is this mess? She thought, wiping her face with the back of her hand. What a mess I've become. Her foot caught on a fallen branch. She fell awkwardly, twisting her ankle and scraping her leg hard against an exposed root. Pain shot through her, sharp and immediate, and she bit back a cry. When she tried to stand, her leg refused to cooperate. It was bleeding, burning. With no strength left, no direction, nothing at all, she dragged herself to the base of a tree, leaned against it, and cried. Deep, ugly sobs, the kind she'd been swallowing for weeks. Branches cracked nearby. Something was moving in the darkness, large, heavy. Muted footsteps crunching through the leaves, coming closer. Jasmine lifted her head, her blood turning to ice. A wolf stepped out of the shadows. It was enormous, larger than any animal she had ever seen. Dark fur, a body made entirely of muscle and silence. Its head hung low, its eyes fixed on her. Terror consumed her. She shrank back against the tree, unable to run, unable to scream, certain this was where everything ended. Then she saw its eyes. Golden. amber flames burning in the darkness. Those eyes. Soren, she thought, and the fear turned into something else. Something nameless. It's him. The wolf stopped a few feet away, its head tilted slightly, and those golden eyes moved over her tear-streaked face, her injured leg, her curled-up body. Slowly, without a hint of threat, it took another step, and another, until it lowered its muzzle close to her, warm breath fanning across her skin, its gaze locked on hers. And Jasmine, who should have been afraid, who should have run, did neither. She broke apart. "Why won't you ever talk to me?" The words came between sobs before she could stop them. Who is she? Who's the woman in that house? Why did you leave me in the forest all those years ago and never come back? Why does everyone say you're a monster? Her voice cracked completely. And why, out of all the women in the world, did you choose my sister? The wolf simply watched her. There was no answer in his eyes, only confusion. A deep anguish, like someone witnessing pain without understanding where it came from. Its head tilted the other way, those golden eyes shifting from her face to her injured leg, and a low sound rumbled from its chest, almost mournful. He doesn't understand, she thought, and that only made her cry harder. Not even now does he understand me. Then the wolf did something she never expected. It lowered itself completely to the ground, folded its legs beneath its body, offered her its broad back, and waited. Those golden eyes remained fixed on her, patient. She understood what he wanted. She hesitated, but her leg throbbed, the night air was cold, and the castle was too far away to reach on foot. Slowly, carefully, Jasmine pushed herself up and swung her leg over the wolf's back, gripping the thick, warm fur. The moment she was settled, the wolf rose to its feet and began to walk. His warmth seeped into her. It was strange. Impossible. She was riding the most feared wolf on the continent through a dark forest, her face buried in his fur. And instead of fear, she felt safe, a sense of safety that made no sense at all. Why do I trust you? She thought, closing her eyes. Why have I always trusted you? He carried her back through the woods, stepping lightly so her injured leg wouldn't be jostled. When they reached the rear of the castle, the wolf stopped and carefully let her climb down. Then, right before her eyes, the enormous body shuddered. The fur receded, bones shifted. The animal's shape unraveled and reformed in the darkness. And where the wolf had stood, there was now a man. Soren, broad shoulders, bare chest, deep, steady breaths. His golden eyes slowly faded back to their usual pale color. Jasmine stared at him, speechless. She couldn't move, couldn't look away. She had heard stories about shifters her entire life, but hearing about them was one thing. Seeing one was another. Seeing one meant standing face to face with the impossible. She didn't even realize she'd stopped breathing until he stepped closer. Soren said nothing. He simply bent down, slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back, and lifted her off the ground with effortless ease. He carried her against his chest all the way to her chambers. He laid her on the bed with a gentleness that made her chest ache and stayed there for a moment, looking at her. She waited for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. He only brushed the back of his fingers lightly against her cheek once. Then he left without a sound. Alone in her room, her leg bandaged and his silence still hurting, the memory came back. All of it. The memory she had locked away. It had happened one afternoon years ago in the forest near Marwick. I found him sitting beside the stream, a wounded man. His arm was bleeding, alone. I didn't know who he was. I knew nothing about kingdoms or crowns or wolves. I only saw a man who needed help. I cleaned his wound with water from the stream. I tore a piece from my own skirt to make a bandage. I shared the bread I had brought with him. He only watched me, with eyes unlike any I'd ever seen, his gaze fixed on me. And when I was about to leave, he spoke. The only thing he said that entire afternoon. "You are an angel." I was 30 years old. 30 years old, and no man had ever looked at me like that, with that warmth in his eyes, as if he saw value in me where the rest of the world had seen none. I stayed with him until evening. The next day, I returned to the same place. He was gone. But then the flowers started arriving, every day, left on my doorstep. No note, no name, no indication of who they were for. Small white flowers that bloomed at the end of winter. Everyone assumed they were for my sister, of course. Always my sister. But I would stare at those flowers and ask myself, a question I barely dared admit even to myself. What if they're for me? What if they're from him? Then came the marriage proposal, from the man who would leave me at the altar, and the flowers stopped. Jasmine sat on the bed, her heart aching, as she pieced together everything she had just realized. The flowers beneath her window, the flower on the pillow, the dried flower she'd kept hidden in her diary for years. It was him. It had always been him. The wounded man in the forest was Soren, the king, the monster from all the stories. But if it was him, why? Why had he disappeared without a word? Why had he never come back, never looked for her, never sent word of who he was? Only flowers. Silent flowers she had never been certain were hers. And if he was the one who sent them, if he was the man who had looked at her that way all those years ago, then why, when the time came to choose a wife, had he asked for her sister instead? Maybe I imagined all of it, she thought, the old fear rising again. Maybe the kind man in the forest never existed. Maybe I created a beautiful fantasy to survive my ugly life, and the real man is this one, the man on the throne, silent, impossible to understand. She buried her face in her hands. I need to know. I can't stand not knowing anymore. At that exact moment, the door opened. Jasmine lifted her head. Soren stood in the doorway in his human form, his expression serious. Beside him stood the man who always followed him like a shadow. The beta. The beta stepped into the room, looked at her, and spoke the first words anyone in that castle had said to her in a very long time. "You can ask whatever you want, my lady. Anything." He glanced briefly at Soren before looking back at her. "I'll answer for him." For a moment, Jasmine could only stare at the two men standing in the doorway. The beta waited patiently. Soren, behind him, never took his eyes off her. And there was something in that look she had never seen before. Fear. The most feared king on the continent was afraid of what she was about to ask. She swallowed hard and chose the first question that hurt. "They say he steals children from neighboring kingdoms." Her voice trembled. "That he tears sons and daughters away from their mothers." The beta slowly shook his head. "He takes in orphans, children left alone by war, with no one else in the world. He brings each of them to Ravenhold and raises them here." He paused. "Soren knows what it's like to be a child with no one. He would never leave another child to that fate." Jasmine felt the first thread snap inside her. "And the women?" she pressed, clinging to her anger like the last piece of driftwood after a shipwreck. "They say he kidnaps women. He gives them shelter," the beta interrupted gently. "Women fleeing abusive husbands, debts that would sell them, marriages that would have been a living death. In Ravenhold, they find a roof over their heads, and no one forcing them to do anything." He looked at her steadily. "You are one of them yourself, my lady. even if you don't realize it yet. And the gold? Her voice faltered. They say he hoards gold while neighboring lands starve. He stores grain, not gold. Enough to survive winters that kill with cold and hunger. And whatever remains, he sends out in secret without his name attached to the villages that need it. A faint smile touched the beta's lips. I'm the one who delivers much of it. I've lost count of the nights I've spent on the road carrying food on behalf of a man who would never let anyone know it came from him. The dungeon. Jasmine twisted the fabric of her skirt in her hands. They say there's a secret prison beneath the castle. There is a place beneath the castle, but it isn't a prison. The beta nodded. It's where the men who returned from war broke and go. The ones who lost pieces of themselves and can no longer bear the way others look at them. There, they find peace. Soren doesn't hide monsters beneath Ravenhold, my lady. He hides the people the world chose to forget. Every word the beta spoke pulled another thread loose, and the entire story Jasmine had built in her mind began to unravel. The villages, she whispered. They say he destroyed entire villages. He destroyed raiders' camps, men who burned homes and took women and children. The ones who survived ran away, telling everyone that the monster of Ravenhold attacked without reason. The beta shrugged. It's easier for a thief to call himself a victim than admit what he was doing. Jasmine pressed her lips together. Tears burned in her eyes, and she no longer knew why. For everything she had believed about him. For all the nights she had feared a man who filled her room with firewood. For calling a monster the only man who... No. There was still one question left. The one that burned the most. Then why doesn't he ever leave the kingdom? Why doesn't he attend events at other courts, other kingdoms? Her voice nearly broke. They say he looks down on everyone. That he thinks he's too important to mingle with anyone else. For the first time, the beta hesitated. He glanced at Soren, who remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Jasmine's lips, always on her lips, and something in the beta's expression softened. It isn't arrogance. He drew a deep breath. Crowds exhaust him. Packed ballrooms, people talking from every direction all at once. It's too much for him. Why? Jasmine frowned. Why would it be too much? The beta held her gaze. Because Soren is deaf, my lady. The air vanished from the room. Deaf. Jasmine went silent. The word should have shattered her, but it didn't. Deep down, she had already known. She had suspected it from the very beginning, when he never answered her, when his gaze always drifted to her lips, when she realized he never exchanged a single word with anyone. Mute. Deaf. Pretending just to torment her. She had considered every possibility. And she had chosen the worst one because it was easier to hate a man who despised her than to understand a man who couldn't hear her. His eyes were always on her lips. He read lips. Of course he did. Deaf. So that was it. But instead of relief, what rose inside her was anger. A different kind of anger wrapped in shame. If he's deaf, she said slowly, looking at the beta. Why didn't anyone tell me? The beta opened his mouth. She didn't let him speak. I suspected it. From the beginning, I suspected it. Her voice rose, trembling. But every day he looked at me without answering, letting me think he despised me, that he was mocking me, that he didn't care about a single thing I said. I hated him for that. A tear slipped down her cheek, born of anger, not pity. One word. That's all it would have taken. You or him or anyone in this castle could have told me. Why did you let me believe he simply didn't care about me? The beta looked at her for a long moment before answering quietly. Because he didn't want you to stay out of pity. He glanced at Soren, whose eyes remained locked on her. A man who has spent his entire life being feared learns to distrust compassion. He preferred your honest hatred over kindness, born from sympathy. He wanted you to know him first, to decide what you felt for him before you learned about the silence. He paused. And even without speaking, my lady, he read every word you shouted at him from your lips. Jasmine turned toward Soren. His eyes were fixed on her, steady and without accusation. Only that impossible tenderness she had mistaken for mockery for weeks. "The house," she said, turning back to the beta, her voice thick with emotion. "The large house in the forest. The woman who opened the door. I saw her smile at him. I saw him go inside. That house is the shelter." The beta nearly laughed. "That's where he goes every night. Not into anyone's arms, my lady. He goes there to serve dinner with his own hands, alongside the others, to the women and children who live there. It's the only time he has left after spending the entire day caring for the kingdom. The young woman you saw is one of the people he took in. She smiles because, to them, he isn't a feared king. He's the man who saved their lives. But it's not just the women at the shelter." Jasmine crossed her arms, old irritation surfacing before she could stop it. "It's the same thing here in the castle. They're always laughing around him. All the time. Laughing too much, if you ask me. At the ball, it was one woman after another smiling, clinging to him." She stopped, because the beta was laughing. And beside him, Soren was too. A silent laugh, his shoulders shaking, the corner of his mouth lifted in a smile she had never seen fully before. "What are you laughing at?" she snapped, her cheeks burning. "Oh, my lady." The beta wiped at the corner of his eye, still laughing. "That's jealousy. Heavens, with all due respect." He raised his hands at the furious look she gave him. "Yes, they smile at him, but it's gratitude. Almost every woman in this castle owes him her life, her child's life, or her freedom. They smile at him the way people smile at someone who pulled them out of the darkest moment of their lives. It's far less than what your imagination has been telling you." Jasmine opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She had nothing to say. And the worst part was that beneath the embarrassment, something inside her warmed. Because if it was jealousy, and it was, she knew it was, then she had lost the war against her own heart a long time ago. Everything. It had all been for nothing. The jealousy, the sleepless nights, the certainty that he belonged to someone else. All the while, he had been kneeling on the floor of a shelter, serving food to orphans. "My lady." The beta took a step forward, his voice softening. "There's something he needs you to know." He looked at Soren, received the slightest nod, and continued. "Soren loves you. He has never stopped loving you. Not since that day in the forest." Jasmine's heart stopped. "The flowers," she said, barely above a whisper. "The flowers that kept appearing at my house. They were from him. They always were." The beta smiled sadly. "Every single one of them. The ones left at your home all those years ago. The ones planted beneath your window. The one you found on your pillow this morning." He never knew how to put his feelings into words, so he spoke with flowers instead, and hoped that one day you would understand. Jasmine thought of the dried flower she had kept tucked inside her diary for years. Of the fool she had been, writing night after night about a nameless man, never knowing that he had loved her all along from the other side of the world. There was one last thing she needed to know. The question came out small, almost afraid. How did he lose his hearing? The beta looked at Soren, silently asking permission. Soren closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. Slowly, like a man unlocking a door that had been shut for far too long. When he was still a boy, Ravenhold was attacked. The beta's voice dropped, quieter and heavier. There was a fire, a terrible one. It consumed the entire castle in a single night. Soren lost everything that night. His father, his mother, his brothers and sisters. His entire family burned, and he survived alone, a little boy in the middle of the flames. That was when he lost his hearing. That was when the world fell silent for him, and it never came back. A tear rolled down Jasmine's cheek, and for the first time, she saw the boy inside the king. The boy who had been left alone in silence and had grown up carrying an entire kingdom on his shoulders. The boy who took in other orphans, so none of them would ever have to be as alone as he had been. "If he loves me," she said, her voice breaking, "then why did he ask for my sister's hand? Why Julie and not me?" Soren shot the beta a sharp look. The beta rubbed a hand over his face and had the decency to look embarrassed. "That part," he sighed. "That's my fault. When Soren told me about you, he didn't know your name. All he had was the memory of a woman who helped him in the forest and a few scattered details about your family. When I passed the information along to the people arranging the proposal, there was a misunderstanding. They confused you with your sister." A sheepish smile crossed his face. "The proposal went to Julie by mistake. But from the very beginning, it was always meant for you." Jasmine let out a wet, disbelieving laugh through her tears. "Of course." She shook her head, bitterness spilling out with the tears. "That makes perfect sense. No one in this world would ever believe a marriage proposal like that could possibly be meant for me. The woman everyone says is too old. The one who was left at the altar. The one they slandered afterward just to make sure no man would ever want her." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Of course they assumed it was Julie. The truth is, my lady, we didn't realize the mistake until tonight." The beta looked at Soren. He only understood how much resentment you carried, toward your sister and toward him, when he found you crying in the forest today. You were looking right at him when you spoke. And even in wolf form, he read enough from your lips to realize something was terribly wrong. That deep down, you believed he had chosen someone else instead of you. He paused. "That's why, the moment we returned, he dragged me out of bed. Panicked, demanding that we clear up the misunderstanding no matter what it took. And only then, putting your words together with everything he told me, did we realize what had happened. The proposal had gone to the wrong sister." Jasmine sat in silence for a moment. Then, through her tears, she laughed. "Well," she wiped her face as the laughter grew, "then I guess the mistake happened twice. Because he didn't marry Julie either. Not quite. I took my sister's place at the altar to save her." The beta's eyes widened. Then he burst out laughing, a broad, incredulous laugh that filled the room. Beside him, Soren laughed too, that silent laugh of his shoulders shaking. And Jasmine, unable to help herself, laughed with them, her tears turning into something else. "What a mess," the beta said, shaking his head. "Two mistakes that canceled each other out. The proposal went to the wrong bride, and the wrong bride ended up marrying the right man." He looked from Soren to Jasmine. "In the end, the moon goddess put each of you exactly where you were meant to be." Jasmine looked at Soren, and the question that hurt most now wasn't born of anger. It was the ache of longing for something she feared she could never have. "How can you understand him?" she asked the beta without taking her eyes off the king. "How do you talk to him? I want so badly to understand him too. For those of us in the pack, it's different." The beta spoke carefully. "Soren speaks directly into our minds. It's a gift shared by wolves who belong to the same pack. He may not have a voice, but he communicates with all of us without needing one. And me? Her throat tightened. Can I hear him that way too? The beta hesitated. You're human. You can't reach his mind. Jasmine felt her heart sink. Then I'll never be able to understand him, she whispered. There is a way. Her eyes snapped up. What way? If you accept his claim. Jasmine held her breath. She knew that word. She had heard stories her entire life about the wolf's bite, about teeth sinking into throats. The very same bite she had sworn, only weeks ago, would be the death of her in this castle. The bite, she said softly. Yes, but it isn't what humans think it is. The beta nodded. It isn't violence. It isn't possession. It's a vow, accepted by both sides. He marks you as his mate, and from that moment on, you'll feel each other, understand each other, speak to each other in ways no words could ever reach. He looked at her gently. The bite you were taught to fear is, in truth, the only thing that can give you his voice. The beta looked from Soren to Jasmine one last time. Then, with a small smile, he stepped back toward the door. I think you two don't need me anymore. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. And then there were only the two of them. Soren crossed the room slowly, each step seeming to carry the weight of a lifetime. He stopped in front of her. Then he did something no one in any kingdom would have ever imagined seeing the Alpha King of Ravenhold do. He knelt. There, on the cold stone floor, the most feared man on the continent knelt before her. He lifted his face and took her hands in his. His eyes traveled over her features, lingered on her lips, then returned to her eyes. And then, in a low voice, rough and rusty from years without use, yet perfectly clear, he spoke. I love you. 3 words. The first words she had ever heard from his lips, and they had cost him more than any battle he had ever fought. Jasmine shattered completely. She dropped to her knees in front of him, cradled his face in her hands, and felt the warmth of tears running down both their cheeks. I was so unfair to you, she whispered. I called you a monster. I hated you. And you. He slowly shook his head and lifted a hand to her face, brushing away a tear with his thumb. Then she kissed him. There was no hesitation this time, no caution, no retreat, no fear. She kissed him with everything she had been holding back for weeks, for years, and he pulled her closer, one hand buried in her hair, the other at her waist. The kiss was deep, hungry, the surrender of 2 souls who had been searching for each other since a sunny afternoon beside a stream. Her thoughts stopped. There was only him, his warmth, his taste, his certainty. When they finally pulled apart, Soren looked into her eyes. A silent question, a plea. And Jasmine understood. She tilted her head to the side, brushed her hair away from her neck, and offered him the throat she had once sworn he would tear apart. Yes, she said, I want to hear you. Soren lowered his face to the curve of her neck. His lips brushed her skin, warm and trembling. She felt his breath, the strain of his control, the care of a man who had waited his entire life for that moment. Then, with infinite gentleness, he bit her. It didn't hurt the way she had imagined. A wave of warmth swept through her entire body, from her throat to her chest, all the way down to her fingertips. Something dormant inside her awakened all at once. Suddenly, she felt emotions that weren't her own. Affection, longing, desire, relief, and a love so deep, so immense, that it stole her breath. It was what he felt, everything he felt for her. And then, inside her own mind, she heard a voice, clear, deep, rough, warm. His voice, with no barriers between them, So this is what your voice sounds like, she thought, and somehow she knew he heard her. It is, he replied inside her mind. And she felt his smile before she even saw it. And with nothing left to hide, with the silence that had imprisoned him his entire life finally gone, Soren told her everything he had carried inside for years.
I fell in love with you the moment I saw you in that forest. You found a wounded stranger, covered in blood, and you weren't afraid. You didn't run. You stayed. You tore a piece from your own dress to take care of me, shared your food with me, and worried about me when you thought I was in pain. It had been so long since anyone had cared for me. Not since the fire. Not since I lost my mother. No one ever had again. And then you came along. A complete stranger. And you treated me like a man when the entire world could only see a monster. I never forgot your smile. Or the way you looked at me without fear, without disgust, without wanting anything I could give you. I searched for you. I sent you flowers because I didn't have the words to tell you how I felt. And I was afraid, cowardly afraid, that you would never come near me if you knew who I really was. The monster of Ravenhold. When I found out you were promised to someone else, I thought I had lost you forever. And when I learned that he left you at the altar, I hated what he had done to you. And still, may the heavens forgive me, I was grateful. Because it gave me one last chance. I asked for your hand in marriage. I knew your family had fallen into ruin, and I used that to find my way back to you. I'm not proud of it. But I had no idea your names had been switched. In my mind, it was always going to be you. And when you walked down the aisle, hidden behind that veil, I knew it was you before I ever saw your face. I caught your scent. My wolf recognized you before I did. The night you walked into my room wearing your wedding dress and poured all your hatred onto me, I nearly lost my mind. Not because of your anger. Because I couldn't tell you that I could read every word on your lips, and even then, all I wanted was to pull you into my arms. Out in the hallway, after the ball, when you tried to kiss me, I wanted to forget every rule I had ever imposed on myself. But you were drunk, and I would rather have died than give you one more reason to believe I was the monster from the stories. And I loved seeing you jealous. May the heavens forgive me for that too. I've been taking care of your family all this time. They're safe. Every debt your father owed has been paid. Your family is no longer bankrupt, Jasmine. My men have been watching over them from a distance, making sure they have everything they need. And if you want, they can come live with us here in Ravenhold. I would love that. You have no idea how much I miss having a family. And Julie misses you too. She's doing well. She's free because of you. I spent years imagining what it would be like to finally talk to you for real. And now that I can, I never want to stop. I want to teach you everything about wolves. I want to take you to all the places I love. I want to show you the forest when spring arrives, the mountains covered in snow, every secret of Ravenhold that no one else has ever seen. But more than anything, I want to live all of it by your side. Because from the day you tore a piece from your own dress to care for a wounded stranger in the forest, my heart stopped belonging to me. It became yours, and it always will.
He lifted her hands and kissed her fingers, one by one, his eyes glowing gold again, locked on hers. Jasmine closed her eyes, his voice echoing inside her mind, his warmth surrounding her. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the woman who had been left behind. The one too old. The damaged one. The one no one had wanted. She felt chosen. Outside, the full moon rose over Ravenhold, And inside, kneeling on the cold stone floor, far from everything the world had invented about them, the king no one had ever understood, and the woman no one had ever wanted, finally heard each other, without a single word spoken aloud. Spring returned to Ravenhold, and with it, the white flowers bloomed once more beneath the castle windows. By then, the story had spread across the kingdoms. People whispered from one corner of the continent to the other that the woman no one had wanted was now the Luna of the most feared kingdom in the world. The man who had abandoned her learned the news the same way everyone else did. Too late, and from the lips of strangers. They said he even sent a letter of congratulations, the kind that hides envy beneath polite words. Jasmine never read it. She had far better things to do than waste a single night thinking about a man who had once made her cry. Because Ravenhold was no longer a place of silence. Her parents moved into the castle as soon as the snow melted enough to make the journey possible. Her father, who walked with a limp, now strolled slowly through the gardens with the help of a carved cane Soren had commissioned for him. Her mother rediscovered herself in the soil, planting those little white flowers in every flower bed she could find. And Julie, freed from the fate that had nearly swallowed her whole, filled the hallways with a laughter the castle hadn't heard in years. Sometimes Jasmine would catch Soren standing still, simply watching it all. The crowded house, the full table. And without him saying a single word inside her mind, she knew exactly what he was feeling. The boy who had survived the fire alone finally had a family again. Talking to him inside her own mind was still the strangest and most wonderful thing in the world. And as she quickly discovered, the quiet king the entire kingdom feared had a wicked mouth when no one else could hear him. It happened during a dinner, the great hall full of nobles and advisors, when his voice suddenly appeared in her mind, low, rough, and anything but innocent. "I'm counting the minutes until this hall empties out. I have plans for you tonight. Very detailed plans." Jasmine nearly choked on her wine. Heat rushed up her neck instantly, and she shot him a sharp look from across the table. Soren cut into his meat with perfect calm, his face serious and unreadable as always. Only the corner of his mouth gave him away, curled into that half-smile she had learned to fear. "For a quiet man," she thought pointedly, knowing he would hear her, "you talk far too much inside my head." "Only because you're the only one who can hear me now," came his warm, unhurried reply. "And because you're desperately missing my voice, among other things." "Stop it," she thought, biting her lip to keep from laughing in front of the entire court. "Stop it. Blush for me again," his voice teased. "I love it when you blush." Later, when the castle had finally fallen asleep, she found Soren waiting for her in their room. But before he could make good on any of the promises he'd spent the entire evening whispering in her mind, she took his hand and placed it against her stomach. Soren went completely still. She saw the question form in his eyes. She saw the fear, the hope, something too immense to fit inside a single man. And she simply nodded. For the second time since she had met him, Jasmine watched the Alpha King of Ravenhold fall to his knees. He pressed his face against her stomach, his arms wrapping around her waist, and inside her mind she felt something that had no name in any language. Pure emotion. Nothing but him. Overflowing. "A family," his voice came thick with emotion inside her mind. "You gave me a family." Jasmine ran her fingers through his hair and looked out the window, where the full moon rose over the kingdom she had once sworn would become her grave. Her whole life, people had told her that no one entered Ravenhold and lived to tell the tale. And it was true, because no one who entered that kingdom ever wanted to leave.